Welcome back to The Age of Meaning. This podcast is about the cutting edge of human thought and the philosophy of the future. In today's episode, we discussed how science, philosophy, and academia are going through a paradigm shift. Our understanding of the universe and the nature of consciousness is changing. In the first part of this episode, we discussed what a paradigm is and what it means to have a worldview. We explored the current de facto scientific materialist paradigm that exists within science and academia today, and how that is being undermined slowly before our very eyes. Profound insights from quantum physics are undermining the materialist paradigm. This is mainly because quantum physics calls into question the very existence of physical matter as we know it. We explore the meaning of quantum entanglement, non-locality, otherwise known as spooky action at a distance, and the observer effect, and how these things actually play out in undermining our ordinary view of reality. So if reality is no longer made of atoms and molecules, then what is it made of? We explore this question in this episode and discuss some of the implications of quantum physics for what it means to be human and our understanding of the universe. This episode is part one of a three-part series on various areas of thought that debunk the standard physicalist materialist paradigm. The first being quantum physicists, and the next episode will be about consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness, and the third episode will be on anomalous experiences like telepathy, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, precognition and synchronicity, and how that also is debunking materialism. So please stay tuned for that so that you're up to date on the cutting edge of human thought. And please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the episode. First of all, welcome, Florian. Would you like to perhaps introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking like maybe not everyone is familiar with what you mean by like a paradigm or like a worldview paradigm in that sense. And scientific materialism, like to us, is very familiar, but it's also part of some sort of intellectual academic discourse that not everybody is familiar with, even though, you know, this stuff is relevant to everybody. And that's the interesting thing that I just wanted to flag, that it sounds a little bit abstract and philosophical and like maybe far removed from our everyday reality. It informs our experience of everyday reality. You know, whether you're aware of that or not. So maybe you can, you know, elaborate a little bit before you dive in.
That's a great point. Yeah, thanks for that. Because that's also one of the things that I was thinking about, was that we have a worldview and we have a belief system that is inherent in everyone's minds and in our culture. And so it's kind of like we used to have religion. You know, religion is a worldview. A Christian person has their worldview. And a scientifically minded person or a modern day person who's secular and atheist also has a worldview. And it basically fills the same spot in their mind. It serves the same function. And so we have a worldview which is inherited from science and that we're taught in school. And that's the scientific materialist paradigm. So, So we have this kind of worldview and it's basically a belief system. But the interesting thing about it is that we take it for granted as just the facts. Like, this is just the way the world is. Reality is made of atoms and molecules, and consciousness is in the brain, and evolution is true, and the Big Bang Theory happened, and all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of taken as like, this is the way the world is. And it's just assumed to be the way their reality is. But it's actually a belief system.
So it's like the story.
In a second.
It's like the story we tell about how reality works, what reality consists of, which is basically like, well, there was a Big Bang once, like I don't know how many billions of years ago, and that sort of just happened, and then the material universe came into being, and the material universe consists of, you know, physical substances, of these physical elements, you know, that make up the elemental table. And then that universe sort of just expanded outward, and then we live on the far edges in time and space of that material universe. And then like we're on this physical planet where over another huge span of time, then biological life eventually emerged, and biological life then produced like human organisms that are complex enough to have a brain and a nervous system that produces the type of consciousness that we experience, and that's what we are. And that's basically the story, right? How we explain the world.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I'm also going to talk about the word paradigm in a second. So let me just dive into this here, because that story that you just mentioned is what we've been raised to believe, and we've taken for granted as the view of the universe, and we don't even realize that it's a worldview. So this is what people are taught in school, and this is what we were taught in school, and what kids are taught in school today. Generally speaking, there's a general worldview, which is like the prevailing paradigm, the prevailing story that we tell ourselves. Now, also to sum it up, to add a little bit more characteristics to it, what defines this view is that the universe is made of dumb physical matter, so it's unintelligent, and that human consciousness is a random fluke, basically, as a result of evolution. And that really we're just biological machines, and our mind and selfhood is really the electrical signals that are happening inside of our brain. Okay, so those are some of the kind of tenets of the worldview that are entailed in scientific materialism. Now, the thing about it is that there was once a point in history when this was the frontier of human thought. This was the cutting edge of science and philosophy. And at this point, we had outgrown our religious fairy tales and now had the courage to look at the facts, and dispense with our childish need to comfort ourselves with stories, to comfort ourselves from the cold hard facts with the stories of religion. So, the fact that we're all going to die one day and that really life doesn't matter, that's like very distressing. There's uncertainty. So humans just invented the idea of God and heaven and like souls to make themselves feel better. That's kind of a very common idea. And that was the idea that was going around at the time during the scientific revolution, which is a very sensible thing to say as well. It makes a lot of sense. So what happened was that around the time of the scientific revolution, this new paradigm based on science became more and more established. And what was once a revolutionary position became established as the new default dominant paradigm of human thought. But as we've learned from Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, paradigms change, okay? So this is also, it's interesting that you asked about the word paradigm, because the word paradigm is actually coined by Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And it's a very, very insightful book. Now, he was a scientist. He was a genius scientist, extremely prolific. And he wrote this book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. So what he revealed is the way that human nature works within science. So once a paradigm is established, it becomes the default mainstream position. And then science is actually done to confirm and support that paradigm or expand on it. So the science that's done once the paradigm is established is to confirm the paradigm and expand on it. It's not to break the paradigm, because there's human bias involved. And so the way that this happens, well, so eventually each paradigm will face a paradigm shift. And this is a pattern. This is something that's observable and that Kuhn has studied from the history of science, that eventually each paradigm will face a paradigm shift. And the way that this happens is that there will be anomalies in data that contradict the paradigm. So there's going to be you're going to have all the evidence of all science, all the data points, and most of the data that you have is going to confirm the paradigm. But then there's going to be anomalies. Like just imagine on a graph, there's some little data points way out there on the side. And a scientist who's doing his studies and whose livelihood depends on his science as well, is going to look at those anomalies and be like, well, we don't want to talk about those. Let's just ignore those anomalies over there. And that happens on a big scale in all these cases across the whole of science. And eventually, the anomalies will become so large and so numerous. This is what Kuhn's saying, what happens in a revolution, is that all the anomalies in a broad sense of the word become so large and so numerous and so significant and impossible to ignore that they need to be integrated. And at this point, the paradigm must shift in order to include the new evidence that has been swept under the rug. Yes.
So, okay. That's what a paradigm is then. So I'm thinking, right, as we moved out of our old religious worldview, like new anomalous data points emerged within our scientific research, and more that we begin to understand, like, while the old picture of reality that was painted by religion is actually not accurate. And so then a new paradigm emerges, which is basically the paradigm that we just started our discussion with, which is like the materialist paradigm, scientific materialist paradigm. Like for me, growing up, being in high school, it's like that's the truth, right? It's like every intelligent, rational person accepts this image of reality painted by science, informed by science. It's like this, we use science, like science is a trustworthy approach to understanding reality. So this is the truth, right? This new paradigm. And so, you're going to tell us that, this is not true. It's like, how is that possible? And how is that not going to be some kind of regression? Like, I'm skeptical right now.
Exactly. Well, you would be right to be skeptical. And that is exactly what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that the whole paradigm is not true anymore. So it's kind of a game changer. It's a huge game changer for human thought. But I would also relate to that because I feel like I also went through a similar phase that you can see in history where we were once religious and we became scientific. Now we are moving beyond that, and it's not a regression, like you say. And when I was like a kid at some point, like 12 or 13 or something, I was raised Christian in a kind of Christian cultural Christian background, and I went to Sunday school and stuff. And I remember being like 12 years old or something and being like, wow, what about the dinosaurs? Like, how did Adam and Eve exist? And then the dinosaurs existed because, you're still kind of told the latent Christianity, but then in school, it's like science. So I was like, what about the dinosaurs? What about Adam and Eve? How come the world is so old? So I became an atheist. And then later on, I would watch Richard Dawkins and all these militant atheists and all that and get into that. And I went through this atheist process of like developing rationality to critique and be skeptical of the old religious story. But then that journey kind of went full circle, and I landed in a place where religion is completely recontextualized as pointing to something deeper, which is actually something somehow more accurate than the simplistic mechanistic view of the universe. Even though it's not necessarily scientific. I mean, it's not necessarily religious, but we'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Carry on.
Okay, so as I was saying, what we're seeing right now is a paradigm shift of epic proportions happening in science, academia, and human thought in general. What we are realizing is that the universe and what it means to be human is much more mysterious and complex than we had thought we settled into with the scientific materialist paradigm. And the consequences for this are massive and wide-ranging. The picture of the universe that we were told in school and we are teaching kids right now is no longer true. Okay. So there's three major points that debunk the materialist paradigm: quantum physics, the hard problem of consciousness, and the existence of telepathy, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, precognition and synchronicities, etc. So we're going to talk about all of these 3 points. First of all, we're going to talk about quantum physics. So quantum physics is very interesting because it kind of debunks the standard scientific picture of science from the inside. And I think this is a good point to also add that when we talk about scientific materialism, we're not criticizing science as a whole, because science itself as a methodology is perfectly fine. Science is effective. Science works. Science as a principle, there's nothing wrong with that. What the problem is that there's a kind of an image of the world that kind of condenses out of science, out of the collective minds of scientists, and then becomes a belief system, a picture of the world. And that's the paradigm. That's the worldview. So it's not science itself, it's the worldview. That's why quantum physics is science and is real science. And it debunks the assumptions and the paradigm and the metaphysics that are implicit in the scientific paradigm. So what we have with classical materialism, this is kind of the old school classic reality model of science. This is classic reality. This is the old school views that come from classic science. And so it assumed 5 things. One is that particles have definite properties independent of observation. Okay, particles have definite properties independent of observation. So a particle exists and it's a solid thing. It doesn't matter whether you observe it or not. It's just a solid object, a particle. The second assumption is that locality is a thing. Locality as opposed to non-locality, which means that an object cannot affect another object without interacting with it directly or beyond the speed of light. So for me to move the cup on my table, I have to hit it with my hand. I can't just make it happen without touching it, okay? Things have to be localized. And the second assumption is mechanistic determinism. So there's mechanistic laws that are controlling the universe. There's a mechanistic laws that things can be observably, predictably observed to behave according to. the fourth assumption is that time and space is the basic stage of reality, and that the mind plays no fundamental role. That's the fifth one. So the mind has no role in the physical universe. The physical universe is just happening. It's a closed causal loop, and it's deterministic. Now, the problem here is that modern physics undermines basically all of that. So all of that no longer true, or at least undermined significantly. Okay. Now I'm going to get into some quotes to explain these things, because I'm not a quantum physicist myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote some heavyweight quantum physicists that elaborate on these points and why these things are debunked. So, first of all, we have Werner Heisenberg. Now, he says the atoms. This is the actual picture of what quantum physicists are telling us. He says that
not
the atoms or elementary particles.
Right?
No, it's not. No, it's not Walter White. He's not involved in this. He is a scientist, not a quantum scientist, though. Although I do wonder what quantum math would be like. Okay. So Werner Heisenberg, he says that the atoms or elementary particles themselves, so the atoms or particles, are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. Okay, they form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. He also noted what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. So what this means is that atoms, we used to think of atoms and molecules as like little balls, little marbles, little objects that exist, like the tiny building blocks of objects that exist. When you go down to the essential level of piece of matter, it's got little balls and atoms and molecules that are playing around with each other. But really, what we find is that actually you can observe an atom or a molecule. You can observe an atom, but the only way that you know that it's an atom is because of your very observation. So the moment that it is observed, it becomes an atom. And before it's observed, it's existing in a superposition. Okay? So this is where it gets really weird, because basically what's actually happening is that there's no solid objects that are existing at the base level of matter. What exists are more like fields or wave functions that can be excitations, and so they can appear as an atom. And when we observe it, it takes a position, and we observe it as that. But what they found is that the observation itself actually makes it change into an atom, or makes it take a position. Before that, it's in a superposition, which means that it can be at multiple places at once, or it can be multiple things at once. So that is Werner Heisenberg. Now, to add another one onto that, we have Niels Bohr, also a genius philosopher and quantum physicist. Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Okay, so a little bit about how this debunks materialism, just to kind of tease it out, is that particles, the part of the standard materialist model of the universe is that matter has solidity. And that when we look at things, there's a realism to things, that there's physical objects in the universe and that there's solidity to it. But basically, now we know, according to science, that matter doesn't have solidity. It's basically a field. It's more appropriate to think of it in terms of energy, as a field of energy or a field of potentials. There's not even a way to describe it. So these are all theories. Basically, at bottom, quantum physicists don't know what it is in reality. There's no like definite thing for what it is. There's only descriptions for what reality is at the base level, what the quantum level is. And so one of my favorite things about this as well is that the non-locality element, which is what Einstein referred to as spooky action at a distance. So I love this because it's such a funny word. So basically, the quantum entanglement means that one atom on the other side of the universe or something, anywhere, one atom that's in another place can be entangled and affect another atom that has no physical contact with it. And so Einstein was like, no, this can't be real. Entanglement can't be right. This makes no sense. Because then what you're saying is that there's such a thing as spooky action at a distance, which means that atoms can affect other atoms across the universe with no physical connection. So Einstein wrote a letter saying, I don't believe entanglement is real, because it was too spooky for him. But later on, they've done experiments that prove basically that it's real. So entanglement. And so that is one of the interesting things. And then the mechanistic determinism is also changed by superpositions. The mind plays no fundamental role. That's also changed by the fact of the observer effect. So we know that when you observe atoms, when you do experiments on them, when there's a perceiver, they actually behave differently. So that's very interesting. It shouldn't be the case that your observation affects the experiment at all, but it is on the most fundamental level of matter. Okay, and then I'm going to continue with some quotes here. We got two more quotes. First of all, from Thomas Nagel, a philosopher of mind. Now, he argues that the neo-Darwinian conception of nature, because now we're transitioning into the consciousness element. I'll just read these quotes and then we can talk about the quantum stuff. But Thomas Nagel argues that the neo-Darwinian conception of nature. Now, what that means is what you were saying, what you described exactly at the start of this episode, which is that you have a big bang and then eventually the organism evolves to produce consciousness. So you have physical universe and then it produces consciousness. So Thomas Nagel says that this conception of nature is almost certainly false because the mind, including consciousness and cognition, is a physically irreducible aspect of nature. Okay. So now the whole paradigm is starting to change. And finally, you have Max Planck. I don't know how to pronounce his name right. But he said that this is also a quantum physicist. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative of consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. So this is kind of getting into the alternative worldview or kind of theories about what might be at the bottom of reality and what reality might actually be. But these are just some quotes from actual quantum physicists, what they actually think about reality. So that is the quantum physics part. Okay. Do you have anything to say about that or any questions? Or?
Yeah. So quantum physics is about the really tiny, minute stuff, right? When you look at the universe at the tiniest scale, that's where you find the quanta, or the sort of the tiniest particle that is not really a particle, but is like more like a wave or energy, as well as being a particle. It's both at the same time. Like depends on how it's observed or whether it's observed or not. But then at the large scale, at the scale of sort of, the scale that we're living at, or the scale of planets like heavenly bodies, there basically classical physics still applies, right? Things like space-time and gravity and the law of thermodynamics and these sort of classical physics concepts and theories, they apply at the large scale, but they kind of break down at the tiniest scale. And it's like, so why should the quantum image of reality take precedent over the classical image of reality, just because because it doesn't necessarily apply universally? Or how is it possible that at the large scale, everything seems to function according to these rules and laws that we know, these sort of physical natural laws of the universe, but they're not supported at the tiniest scale, how do those two relate to each other?
That's a great question. I think that is a good question. I think it takes precedent because, well, what I understand is that the classical model that applies to like the bigger size things that are happening, like our bodies, where they are they're stable, and there's atoms. You can see an atom, you can work with an atom, you can split an atom bomb. But what this is that it's kind of like an arrangement of the quantum state into this particular form. So the quantum state is that on the tiniest level, and it's also that maybe on the tiniest level, it's on the essence level. it's the essence of things when you break them apart to their tiniest level, is that in the essence there's things like superposition and entanglement. And then so something can take a position. So like one wave function, one structure, one wave function that exists can take a position and form into an atom. And it does that in creating the universe, like in the universe as it's structured.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I understand it. And so it's like a more fundamental level of matter.
So basically at the tiniest level, things are not stable or certain. There's like these quantum fluctuations, and like you can't get a firm grip on it, or if you try to get a grip on it, you kind of you change the structure of it. And so there's the quantum field is like full of fluctuations and indeterminacy, and it's like you can only speak in terms of probabilistic. You can only speak in terms of what's probable, but not what's certain, right? But then at the more macro level, at the bigger level, all of those quantum fluctuations and indeterminacies, they kind of level out somehow and then produce a seemingly stable reality at this level of observation. And that's where we're living, at least that's what we think. But well, at the same time, it's the case that also the physical body that we inhabit also is made up of the quantum at the very foundational level, right? And so, what does that imply about who we are or what we are, right?
Well, I think it undermines the simplistic view of reality as being made of solid things, solid stuff, objects, stuff. And that maybe on the deeper level, the body is not just made up of atoms and molecules. But what we know from quantum physicists like Niels Bohr and Max Planck is that this is fundamental. This is a radical thing. So these are good questions. I share these questions. I don't know the answer to them exactly. But what we do know is that matter fundamentally has no solidity, and entanglement exists, which means that things can happen at a distance without touching each other, and that there's an observer effect. Okay, so, and what this means, I think, for me, is that the physical structure, the matter of the unit, because you normally think that if you like look at a table and you hit a table and you're seeing with your hand and you're seeing the universe, you're seeing the physical universe, that the physical universe is solid and it exists, it has solidity, but it's more the case that that's an appearance, and that it's organizing itself as physical, structured, solid objects that are deterministic and mechanistic. But if you pierce deeper with like the infinite telescope of quantum physics that mankind has built, and you pierce deeper into the heart of matter, then you find that it's a totally different, mysterious situation going on. And it's not like what you find in the bottom of atoms, which we know from classic physics as well. Before quantum physics, I think, I'm pretty sure, when you pierce deep into the matter itself, you don't find more little pieces of matter. So that's a core thing. You don't find smaller building blocks of physical matter. You find that matter kind of bottoms out into like a kind of emptiness or a field or potential or wave, which is not the same thing as ordinary matter that we experience.
So basically what you get is that the reality that it's like the reality as we experience it is material, but it's material to us, right? It's like the physical universe is a physical universe to us. And it's like it's because of who we are, what we are, that the physical universe looks the way it looks and feels the way it feels, or has all these properties that we can observe with our senses. And for the longest time, we have assumed that that's what reality is really like. That's just the reality as it exists outside of us. It's just the world, the universe, and it has an independent existence, and we live inside of that universe. But now we know that the universe that we think we live inside of itself is actually a production of what we are, or who we are, right? And is actually rendered as such, in relation to us. But in itself, as it exists on its own, actually, then if you study the properties that it has, it has nothing in common anymore with, you know, what we're observing or what we're experiencing, because at the fundamental level, at the foundational level, actually what it is something much more mysterious and ingraspable and sort of beyond clear categorization or beyond, you know, these definite characteristics, and becomes much more mysterious in a way.
Exactly.
Or becomes something that that
think
has
just
sort of the potential to be anything, but has no definite characteristics of its own, right?
I think just to echo that and to reiterate the points that are being made by quantum physicists themselves, I'll just repeat this Niels Bohr quote, which is what you just said. Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. And he says, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. So this is straight from the horse's mouth of the quantum physicist. It's going to shock you profoundly. Things that we regard as real are not real in the ordinary sense. Okay, so that's where the normal materialistic picture of the universe starts to break apart already within science itself. And also what you said about the fact that we're always experiencing, you know, we're kind of experiencing the world through the way the world is determined by the way that we are, the way we're perceiving it in some way. So we're perceiving this classical world through our mind. That also leads into the next point. The next part, point number 2 of 3 of the debunking of materialism. So that is the very fact of consciousness. So we're going to transition out of the quantum conversation for now and go into the question of consciousness.